Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen who are present here in this hall, and all those live viewers around the world. As you might be knowing that the Library Tibetan works in archives, requests and invites experts specialized in respective fields of study to share the wisdom with us and the people around the world. So today we have here with us Dr. B.Tucker from the United States. So let me give you a brief introduction of Dr. B.Tucker. So Dr. B.Tucker, a prominent child psychiatrist, holds a prestigious Bonner-Lowry professorship of psychiatry and neurobehavioral sciences at the University of Virginia School of Medicine, which is in the United States, of course. So for a period of 9 years, he served as esteemed medical director of the Child and Family Psychiatry Clinic at the university. Dr. Tucker's primary research focuses on documenting the stories of children who claim to remember past lives, as well as exploring the intriguing realms of natal and prenatal memories. He cooperated extensively with Dr. N. Stevenson, the founder and the director of Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia School of Medicine, and eventually he took over the program after the retirement of Dr. Stevenson in 2002. Dr. Tucker's authored a book titled Before, that includes 2 volumes, Life Before Life and Return to Life, which offers a comprehensive overview of over 4 decades of scientific investigation on reincarnation. The publication was widely recognized and appreciated by different sectors around the world. His pioneering work has earned him widespread recognition, leading to appearances in print media as well as television interviews across the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada. Notably, he was also interviewed on popular TV show, as you might be knowing, Lady King Live, where he eloquently discussed the intriguing cases he has examined over the years. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to present to you our today's distinguished speaker, Dr. B.Tucker. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And can people hear me okay? It's a real privilege to be here to talk to you all. And I'm going to give you a little bit of the background on it, but talk about work at the University of Virginia that's been going on for 60 years now, studying cases of children who report that they remember a past life. And in particular, I'm going to focus on American cases that from the past couple of decades. So the story starts with us with Ian Stevenson. If I have a show of hands, anyone familiar with Ian Stevenson? No, just my wife. So Ian Stevenson was a very successful psychiatrist in the U.S. who came to the University of Virginia to be the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry back in 1957, and he was still quite a young man at the time. He was in his late 30s, just doing completely mainstream psychiatry, but he did have an interest and openness to things like parapsychology. And then he started becoming intrigued by reports from various parts of the world of young children saying that they remembered a past life. And he eventually decided to go investigate. And his first trip was actually to India. And he had heard about 4 or 5 cases when he went to India for a month and found 25 cases. And he realized this phenomenon was more common than anyone, at least in the West, had any idea about. So he started studying more and more cases. He eventually essentially devoted the last few decades of his life to this work. He went all over. This is a picture of him in Burma studying a case. And he always used a very careful, methodical approach, trying to determine as much as possible what a child in each case has said about a past life and whether that information matches the life of a deceased person. So can the child's memories be verified to be accurate for somebody who lived in the past? Meaning, does the case provide evidence of survival after death? He eventually, in 1967, he stopped being the chair of the department and just formed a research division, which is now called the Division of Perceptual Studies, or DOPS is the acronym. So that was in 67, and we've been going on ever since then, so 50-some years. He continued to study cases for quite some time and went all over the various continents, mostly in Asia, but various continents wherever he could find cases, and wrote a number of books and papers and got some notice that way. And then His Holiness the Dalai Lama came to Charlottesville, where the University of Virginia is, in 1979. This is a picture of him on campus, and standing next to His Holiness is Jeffrey Hopkins, who was at the University of Virginia and was official interpreter for His Holiness for 20 years, starting in 1976. So then in 1979, His Holiness came to visit. Jeffrey Hopkins started a very well-regarded Tibetan Buddhist studies program at UVA, which is still going. There's the UVA Tibet Center today where the work at Jeffrey Hopkins is no longer working, but where the work continues. And then between the Dalai Lama and Jeffrey Hopkins, behind them is Ian Stevenson. The Dalai Lama had heard about Ian's work, so when he came to Charlottesville, he asked to meet with Ian and talked about his research into these cases. So to tell you about some of the features of these cases, they involve very young children who talk about a past life. The average age when they start talking about it is 35 months. So it's usually a 2 or 3-year-old who starts coming out with these things. And typically by the time they get to be 6 or 7, they stop talking about them and then just go on with their lives, with school and so forth. And I'm wondering, another show of hands, has anyone here met a child who remembered a past life? None at all. All right, well, I'll tell you about what we see in the patterns that we see in these cases. So it can be important to keep in mind that the children with these memories who have, or at least seem to have, active memories of a past life, what they describe may not be the same patterns that occur for people who do not remember past life. So, for instance, they describe very recent, ordinary lives. Most of them, the previous person died only a few years before the child was born. Now, that doesn't mean that's always the case in reincarnation, but for the children where the memories come through, it tends to be quite recent. Now, there are exceptions, and I'm going to tell you about 2 cases where there were decades between them, but usually it's only a few years. And when I say ordinary, they are not talking about being famous people in the past, or kings or queens or anything like that. They're describing somebody typically who lived fairly close by, usually in the same country, who just kind of had an ordinary, lived and died kind of life, but then the child seems to have memories of it. Some of the children talk about being a deceased family member. But others describe being strangers in another location. And if they give enough details, and in particular the names, then people have often gone to the place that they named and been able to verify that their memories actually do match somebody who lived in the past. Some of the cases also, the children are born with birthmarks or birth defects, sometimes full birth defects, that match wounds that the previous person suffered, usually fatal wounds that they suffered. So it's not just consciousness or memories, but there's also can be this physical aspect that appears as well. And then some of the children will show behavioral and emotional features that seem to be part of their memories of a past life. So many of them will really miss their previous family, and they will cry and beg their parents to take them to their previous family. Sometimes they will tell their parents, "You're not really my parents live in such and such place." And that can be quite upsetting to everyone involved. The child is going through a lot of emotional upset, which is hard for a parent to see. And on top of that, the child is sometimes telling the parent, "You're not really my parent." So it can make for a very difficult few years until the memories subside and they stop talking about the past life. As far as the behaviors go, some of the children will show phobias related to the past life. So in the cases where the previous person died violently, over 35% of those children will show an intense fear toward the mode of death. So, for instance, there was a girl where the previous girl drowned in an accident. And this girl, from the time she was a baby, basically hated being in water. And even as an infant, it would take 3 adults to hold her down to give her a bath. And then when she got old enough to talk, talked about this past life of this other girl. And then with their play, a lot of the children will compulsively play at themes that seem to connect with the past life, most often the previous occupation. And sometimes an occupation that seems quite surprising to the family, but the kids will just play for hours and hours at this job that the person in the last life had. So we have found cases all over. And we've studied over 2,500 cases from around the world. They are easiest to find in cultures with a belief in reincarnation. So I've listed the countries where we have the most cases, but that's only because we've had people looking for them there. And cases have been found all over on all the continents, and they have certainly been found in the West as well. So I started doing this work in the late 1990s, and I took some trips to Asia, but then I decided to focus on American cases for a couple of reasons. One, they don't have the potential cultural impacts that, or influences that cases, say, in India might have. And also, I felt like they could make sometimes a bigger impact on U.S. People to know that there can be cases right down the street of a child talking about a past life. Now, previously, Ian had done a comparison of American cases to cases from India, and he studied, compared 79 American cases to ones from India. And what he found was that in the American cases, the children had made very few statements about a past life that could be verified. The exceptions being if they talked about a deceased family member, then those they could verify. But unfortunately, the children often would not give names or places of where the past life had happened. So no one was able to verify that that past life actually existed. So some of the children will remember a lot of details of the past life, but if they don't have the right details, like names of people or places, then it becomes often impossible to verify that in fact, the memories are valid. He also noted that the cases often occurred in families without a belief in reincarnation, and that has continued to be the case as we've gotten more cases. He also found for him, the cases often, he heard about them years later. Someone would learn about his work and write to him and say, my child is now 30 years old, but when they were young, they talked about a past life. We're now able to get to a lot of cases sooner. So we set up our website, well, it's been 25 years ago now. So we don't have to try to find American cases because they find us. The parents will see that their child seems to be remembering a past life, and then they'll do an internet search and find us and write to us. So we are now averaging 120 reports a year from American families with their child talking about a past life. And most of them continue to come from families that had not believed in reincarnation before their child started talking about a past life. And some of them are quite opposed to the idea of reincarnation. These kids are coming from Christian families where reincarnation is not a part of their religious faith, and it can be hard for them to kind of to make sense of them. But what we see is that the American cases, they basically have the same features as cases from other places. So these reports show that children's reports of past life memories are not purely a cultural phenomenon. It's not that they only happen in places where there's a general belief in reincarnation. In fact, they happen everywhere. And I want to, a couple of things. So we get 120 reports a year, but most of them we do not investigate because, again, they don't have the verifiable kind of details where we can investigate them. But it does show that there are a lot of children out there who are talking about a past life. But then we get the ones that do have verifiable details, and then we try to explore them as much as we possibly can. I'll tell you about one case that is a well-known case in the U.S. It's a little boy named, he's not little anymore, but he was little. He's named James Leininger. And his parents were this Christian couple in Louisiana who certainly had no belief in past lives before James started talking about one. And he described being a pilot in World War II, an American pilot who was shot down and killed. And it's now believed that pilot has been identified. So the story started when James went with his dad to a flight museum when he was 22 months old. And he was particularly fascinated by the World War II exhibit. He insisted on continuing to go back to it. They ended up spending 3 hours at the museum. And he was just really taken with planes from World War II. And then a couple of months later, around the time of his second birthday, he started having terrible nightmares several times a week where he would be kicking his legs up in the air and screaming, "Airplane catch on fire, little man can't get out." And these were quite traumatic for his parents to watch because he really was acting like somebody who was fighting for his life. And then during the day, he would take his little toy airplanes and say, "Airplane crash on fire," and bam, he would slam them into the family's coffee table. And he did it over and over again. Here's a picture of the family's coffee table if it projects. There are dozens of scratches and dents from "airplane crash on fire," bam. So you combine that with the nightmares, he really looked like a traumatized child. But he had not gone through any trauma in this life, at least. And then his parents were able to talk with him about this several times when he was awake. And he told them that his plane had crashed on fire, that it had been shot down by the Japanese, and that he flew a Corsair, which was the picture of this plane. It's a special plane that was developed during World War II. And as it happens, there was not a Corsair at the Flight Museum when he and his dad visited, so that's not where he learned about them. But he, at a very early age, around 2, talked about flying a Corsair. And then one day he said that he had flown off of a boat. His plane had flown off of a boat, and they asked him the name, and he said Natoma, which would be quite an unusual guess for an American aircraft carrier. After he said that, his father went online and tried to find information about a ship called Natoma. And eventually came across this information about a ship called the USS Natoma Bay. And he printed out the information, and you can't see it, but at the bottom, the footer shows the date when he printed it out, which was August 27th, 2000. James was born in April of 1998. So it shows that by the time that James was 28 months old, that he was talking about this ship Natoma that he said his plane had flown off of. It turns out that the Natoma was an escort carrier in the Pacific during World War II. And they would also ask him his name then, and he would always say just me or James, which they didn't make anything of. And then one time they asked him who else was there, and he gave the name Jack Larson. This is all when he was 2. And then when he was 2.5, his father bought this book to give his grandfather for Christmas, and it's about the Battle of Iwo Jima during World War II. He was thumbing through it one day when James came and got in his lap, and they were looking at the pictures, and they got to this one where it shows the picture of Iwo Jima. And James pointed at it and said, "That's where my plane was shot down." And his father said, "What?" And he said, "My airplane got shot down there, Daddy," which floored his father that his little 2.5-year-old was talking that way. And then when James got old enough to draw, he repeatedly drew pictures of planes or battle scenes. He drew scores of them according to his parents, and he would always sign them James 3, which I thought might be because he was 3 years old at the time, but he kept signing them that way even after he was 4. But his parents asked him about it, and he said, "I'm the third James. I'm James 3. So eventually, when he was 4.5, his parents did begin to wonder, was he remembering a past life? So his father attended a Natoma Bay reunion, talked with the veterans there, and he had been looking for Jack Larson among the war dead, but the Jack Larson from the Natoma Bay had survived the war and was actually still alive. So James's dad went and visited him. He learned that he was on the ship during the Iwo Jima operation. And he had also learned that there was one and only one pilot from that ship who was killed at Iwo Jima, which means if James was remembering a past life, it had to be this person's life. This was a young man from Pennsylvania, a 21-year-old pilot named James Houston. So what we can do, or what we did, was compare what James said about his past life with the facts from James Houston's life. And I'm going to show you a list of items where there's definite documentation that was made of James's statements before Houston was identified. James signed his drawings James 3. Well, James Houston was James Jr., which would make James Leininger the third James. James said that he flew at the Natoma, and Houston was a pilot on the USS Natoma Bay. James said he flew a Corsair. Houston had flown a Corsair. He was actually flying a different plane when he was killed, but he was part of the group that tested the Corsair for the Navy. James said that his plane was shot down by the Japanese, and Houston's plane was shot down by the Japanese. James said he died at Iwo Jima. Houston was the one and only Natoma Bay pilot who was killed there. James said one day, quote, "My airplane got shot in the engine and crashed in the water, and that's how I died." Houston's plane, eyewitnesses reported, was, quote, hit head-on right on the middle of the engine. James had nightmares of his plane crashing and sinking in the water. Houston's plane crashed in the water and quickly sank. And James said that Jack Larson was there, and Jack Larson was the name of the pilot of the plane next to Houston's on the day that he was killed. So a case like that impresses us because it's evidence of this seeming connection, the strong connection between this man who had been killed in 1945 and this little boy who was born hundreds of miles away in 1998. And cases like this raise the question, why do these children remember a past life when most children don't? And there are two parts of the question to consider. One is there something about the past life that makes it more likely that those memories will survive and carry over? Or is it something about the child or something about the present life that makes it more likely that they had those memories? So we've tried to look at kind of both aspects of it. Looking at the past life, one aspect that stands out, I said they were ordinary lives, but the one part of the life that's often out of the ordinary is how the previous person died. In 70% of the cases, the previous person died by some sort of unnatural means, meaning murder, suicide, combat, accident, that sort of thing. So that certainly seems to be significant. And with each case, we code them on 200 variables and put them into a database. And we can then look at the database to see what patterns we can see. And one thing we've looked at is the mode of death. I'll warn you ahead of time, this graph I'm about to show it looks a little complicated, but what it is, going up and down is the number of cases. Going across is the age when the previous person died. And then the bars, the different colors are the way that they died. The green bars on top are the natural death cases. And then all the other colors are the various kinds of unnatural deaths. The main point of this slide is to show that we have a lot of unnatural deaths. But if you look, it also looks like people are dying young. What's challenging is that people who die unnatural deaths tend to die younger. But what we can do with the database, we can pull out those and just look at natural death to see if dying young is a separate factor from dying violently in these cases. This next graph is just one I pulled off the internet, but it's a typical graph of deaths by age. And what you see as you go across the lifespan, that more and more people die until, as they get older, until it looks like around late 80s, where then there are so few people left that it drops off. But for most of the lifespan, there's this gradually upsloping curve as more people die as they get older. In our cases, in the natural death, what we see is the curve that actually goes in the other direction. And a quarter of them, the previous person was 15 years old or less when they died. So it does seem that dying young is a separate factor from dying violently. So those are two factors that seem to make it more likely that a child will later report memories of that life. Now, there's also the question, is there something about the children that caused them to have these memories? We've done psychological testing on a number of them, and I'll show you, this is intelligence testing. The individual numbers don't really matter, but with intelligence testing, the average in the general population is 100. And what we see is that these kids are quite bright. And in fact, with each subtest as well as the total score, they're all significantly over 100. So the kids otherwise seem to be perfectly ordinary. They are not having a lot of dissociating, or they're not having a lot of behavioral or emotional problems. They're quite smart and quite verbal, but otherwise are normal kids. It's possible that being more verbal compared to other children could be significant here, because it may be that other children also have some images from a past life, but by the time they get verbal enough to express them, those memories have faded. Whereas with the smarter or more verbal kids, verbalizing them may cause them to stay in their minds more and to become long-term memories. So that may well be a significant factor in these cases. One of our colleagues, Erlander Haraldson, did testing in Sri Lanka and Lebanon with other children talking about a past life, and got similar results. So again, this does seem to be an important factor. We've also looked recently, and we're still crunching the numbers, but we've looked recently at what happens to these kids when they grow up. And this follow-up study is being spearheaded by Marietta Pelavanova, who's a psychologist in our group. But what we've done is we have looked at Americans who are now adults who we first interviewed when they were children. And of course, Ian started this work in the 1960s, so some of them are older. We found, or at least thought we found, contact for 82 individuals. We eventually were able to enroll 23 of these adults in the study. 13 are women, the other 10 were men. The average age was 44 at that time. The ones that I studied are younger than that, but they go as old as 62, which certainly would have been one of Ian's cases. So we had them complete questionnaires, and we interviewed them about how their memories had impacted their lives, and then had them fill out various surveys about personality, spirituality, happiness, kinds of surveys. And again, we're still analyzing the results, but to look at them as a group, one thing we looked at is their education. And these charts, again, are from Marietta. But what we see here, I guess you can read that, 56% of them had a college education or above, which is seems to be more than what you would expect in the general population in the U.S. And their occupations really run the gamut. They're teachers, health professionals, air traffic controller, managers, and you can see the others. So that they have generally been accomplished in various ways. And we've looked at, or we asked, whether they still had memories of the past life, even as adults. And no one said that they had really clear memories, but 11 of the 23, said that they had at least some. So nearly half report at least some memories. And most often, memories from the circumstances surrounding their death or the mode of death, which matches with what we hear from the children. 3/4 of them have memories of how they died in the past life as children, and then we see that a number of them still had those memories as adults. And then the other thing that would stand out in their memories would be that they would talk about their occupation or things they did regularly in their past life. So again, similar to what they recalled as children, except a lot fewer. So one thing that we did years ago, we figured out this strength of case scale where we have our database that assigns points to various features like the number of verified statements that the children have made or birthmarks and that sort of thing. And what we see is if you look at the strength of the original case, looking at the strength of case scale, the ones who still have memories as adults were significantly stronger cases than the ones who didn't. So for where the past life memories have all faded away, the score was average 3, whereas it was 10 for the ones who still have memories. The strength of case across all the U.S. cases, the average is 5.8. So the ones who have no memories at all, those are actually weaker cases in general on average than the U.S. average. So it appears that the stronger cases are more likely to result in memories that continue into adulthood, which kind of makes sense. That it was a bigger factor in their lives as very young children, and so they retained some of those memories as they got older. Now, we also asked them about how important were these memories to them in their lives, both when they were children and then also as adults. And what we see, these bars, the red or the gray would mean that memories are somewhat important or very important. And what we see as far as how it affected their childhood, 56% of them said the memories were either somewhat or very important. As far as adulthood, however, 74% said that the memories were not at all important, but they had affected their development. And we asked them what sort of impact the having memories had on the participants, and we got several descriptions. One said, I realized that the connections we have in this lifetime are part of something larger. They don't exist in a vacuum. Whatever happens romantically in this lifetime is part of something bigger. It's in the here and now, but not only in the here and now. Another one said, well, knowing that this life that we live isn't the only life that you have and that your spirit lives forever, it made me realize that I need to find out what life is all about. How come we are here now, and how come we live this life that we're living? And then a third said, as a child, I lost a great-grandparent, both grandparents, and a step-grandparent. It lessened the blow as I started to understand that they will be back. They may suffer in the end, but there may be a new beginning for them. Losing 3 people in a matter of a year to a year and a half, I started to understand that I may run into them later. So to sort of summarize it, it seems that these individuals who had the memories as kids, that they're doing well as adults. And for some of them, they felt like that having had the memories made a positive impact on them, particularly how they view life and death. So now I want to kind of close with telling you about another American case. This is a little boy named Ryan. We got a letter one day. We don't get many letters anymore. Now it's usually email. But we got a letter from a mom in Oklahoma who said that her 5-year-old Ryan, for the last year, had talked about wanting to go home to Hollywood. And he would cry and on a daily basis, cry and beg his mother to take him back home to Hollywood. To try to help him develop some sort of closure with this, she went to their public library and got some books on Hollywood. And one night they were looking through one, and they came to this picture from an old movie from like the 1930s called Night After Night. And Ryan pointed to the fellow, the second from the left there, and said, "Hey, Mama, that's George. We did a picture together." And then he pointed to the one on the far right, wearing the light overcoat, and said, "And Mama, that guy's me. I found me." Well, the first one he pointed to was George Raft, who was a well-known actor back in his day, is not one that's remembered much now. And I will say the picture did not have a caption, or didn't name the people in the caption, is what I mean. The one he pointed to, who he said he had been, was actually an extra with no lines in the movie. So his mother wrote to me to see if I could help figure out who this was. I visited the family, found them to be very nice, genuine folks. The mom worked in the county clerk's office. The father was a police officer, and they were kind of shocked to have this child who kept saying that he had had a past life. So then after I got back and started trying to figure out who this was, Ryan's mother continued to email me with the statements he was making about a past life. He was making all these statements about a past life, describing a life that frankly I thought was a little unlikely for an extra with no lines in a movie. Eventually, we were able to determine the identity of this person with the help of a Hollywood archivist. She went to the library of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and got the materials from there, most of which were about the stars of the movie. But then she came across this picture, and on the back of it, it gave his name, Marty Martin, and said that he was playing a racketeer in Paramount's Night After Night with the stars of the movie, including Mae West, if people know her. It's her first movie. But with the stars of the movie, how he gives a demonstration of underworld sartorial excellence. And then his family later confirmed that this, in fact, was who Ryan had pointed to and said that he had been in his past life. So this fellow, Marty Martin, even though I thought it was unlikely that this extra with no lines in the movie had the kind of life that Ryan described, Marty Martin did. So Ryan had said how he had danced in New York and on stage in New York. Marty Martin danced on Broadway. Ryan said he went to Hollywood and worked in the movies. Marty Martin did, working mostly on dancing in the movies. Ryan said that he then worked at an agency where people changed names, and Marty Martin started a successful talent agency in Hollywood. Ryan said that he saw the world from big boats and talked about going to Paris. Marty Martin and his wife went to Europe on the Queen Mary and visited Paris. Ryan said that he had a big house with a swimming pool, which Marty Martin did. And he said that he lived on a street with the word rock or mount in the street named, and Marty Martin lived on North Roxbury. He also said one time that he didn't know why God would let you get to 61 and then make you come back again as a baby. Marty Martin's death certificate said that he was only 59 when he died. But then his family said that in fact he was 61, and I looked into it and found census records and marriage listings, multiple ones that all showed that in fact he was 61 when he died and not 59. So even though the death certificate said 59, Ryan was correct when he said 61. Marty Martin had a daughter who was 8 years old when he died. And we met with her and asked her about Marty's life. There were a number of things that she didn't even know because she was so young when he died. She didn't even know about one of his sisters. But between talking with her and the records we were able to get, we were eventually able to confirm over 50 of Ryan's statements as matching Marty Martin's life. Ryan is now grown up and in college, and I had some contact with him a few months ago. Unfortunately, his father died of a heart attack, but Ryan is doing well. He's in college, has put all this behind him, and seems quite a well-spoken, well-adjusted young man. So sort of the conclusions from our work, not just with the American cases, but with the cases from all over. So we can now say confidently that children in various parts of the world, including in the U.S., have demonstrated memories of a past life. These children tend to be intelligent and psychologically healthy. They may have to cope with various issues related to their apparent memories, such as anxiety and fears and even grief at times, but as adults, they appear to be doing well overall. And again, some of them feel that their memories had a positive effect on their lives, especially on their perspectives on life and death. But the work continues, and we certainly don't claim to have all the answers about this. And in fact, there are still more questions than we have answers. And I want to finish with a quote. Ian Stevenson, who continued working into his late 80s, he officially retired in 2002, but he actually kept working and publishing papers almost until his death in 2007. His final paper that he published was a wonderful review of his work, and he finished it with this statement. So his final published words were, "Let no one think that I know the answer. I am still seeking," which was how we continue to approach this work. And again, that there are plenty of questions that our work does not answer, including what determines which family individuals are reborn into. And for the ones where they're born in the same family, you can certainly imagine that there's this emotional link that helps pull them back to it. But what about the ones like James or Ryan, where they are born to complete strangers who live nowhere close to them? What would lead them into that family? And we don't have the answers, but I'd be curious to know any thoughts that people have here about how that may happen. So let me stop now for discussion. So I will open the floor, and thanks very much for listening.
What happened to those children so far now? Did there any development, further development? Yes. What happened to those children, those who remember their past? And what is the current situation here?
For them, you mean, for the children?
Yeah. No, I mean, they have a very big, like a memory.
Right.
So when they grow up, so did their memory develop more?
No, the memories actually develop less. As far as what happens to the memories as the children go, they definitely fade. And I mentioned that they typically stop talking about the past life when they're 6 or 7. And for many of them, they lose the memories at that age. Some of them don't even remember as they're older that they ever talked about a past life. Now, that's around the same age that all of us lose our memories of early childhood. So the way memory works is that their younger kids, 3-4-year-olds, will have people that they have things that are definitely in their long-term memory. So, for instance, we have young grandchildren. Well, if the 5-year-olds certainly know us and are excited when we come, but if something happened to us, then by the time they were teenagers or even younger, they might well have no memories of us, or only very vaguely. So it's the same pattern that we see in these cases. Sometimes when they're young, the memories can be extremely vivid. But as they get older, they can either lose them completely or at least they fade where they're much less prominent than they were before.
Recall, I'm sorry, has anything in your research explained why there is such vivid recall in these younger children? We know that that's sort of a pattern in general of children's memories fading, but why would there be such a strong pull in smaller kids? Is there something neurological, or is there something you have psychologically looked into which would explain that?
Well, as far as sort of psychological issues, I mean, it seems that these young children, that there's sort of this doorway to these memories that then, again, fade so in humans, the brain undergoes tremendous changes around the age of 4 or 5, where they lose some memories, but also skills that we are not using, those things sort of atrophy and go away. So for instance, if you think about language, there are all these different sounds that a very young child would be able to say or hear, but then after 4 or 5, the sounds that they're hearing from other people in their culture, then the ones they're not hearing, they will lose that ability. Now, as far as these memories go, it seems very similar to post-traumatic stress disorder, where the memories that often stay with us are the most difficult ones and ones that we wish that we didn't have. So again, most of these children are have traumatic, violent memories that stay with them. And then it may be that sort of the nicer memories carry with that, but it's the traumatic ones that drive it.
When reincarnation or what is scientific? What kind of really we have?
How do we make sense of it, or how do we explain it? Is that what you're asking? Scientific viewpoint. Well, it really varies. Mainstream science in the West would still say that this is impossible. So they would ignore the cases or just dismiss them out of hand. But there are plenty of individuals in the scientific community who are open to these things. So surveys have shown that a substantial substantial percentage of people in science are quite open to spiritual kinds of phenomena. And we hear from physicians or other scientists all the time who are intrigued by this work or impressed by it, but they often kind of keep it to themselves as far as with the people they're working with, but because again, it's not accepted in mainstream science, even though it often is accepted by individual scientists.
Hearing about how you did a few studies on these cases and you discovered that these children were mostly highly verbal and quite intelligent. And I couldn't help but wonder, because these cases, their stories and the memories of these children, in order for them to get to you, they're relying on the parents to believe them and listen to them and expand on that and allow that to be real in their household and then report it to you. So I was wondering, perhaps some children actually do have these memories, but they're not in a relational situation where the parents are actually listening and believing and honouring that, and whether that does or does not have a correlation with a child being more verbal in general.
Right.
So I was wondering if you had done any sort of looking into the family as a whole where this is happening in these cases, because it's really dependent on a great relationship with the parents, actually.
Well, right, because the parents have to at least listen to them.
Yeah.
And that's a study that we want to do, where we look at the psychological factors, not just in the child, but in the family as a whole. But I have no doubt that, the parents have to be at least listening to their children in order to contact us. And I'm sure that there are ones where the parents just tell the child to be quiet. I mean, I'm certain there are.
That's what I was thinking.
But however, in the places with beliefs in reincarnation, like in India, even with those, many of the parents try to get the child to stop talking about the past life. Partly because in some areas it's believed that talking about a past life will then lead you to have a shorter life. And then others, there are times, to be honest, where the parents get tired of hearing it. The child keeps saying, "You're not my parents." So the parents will use various tactics to try to get them to stop. But it doesn't seem to make any difference as far as the age when they stop. But even in those cases, I mean, the parents believe them. They just want them to stop talking. Whereas in the American families, there are a lot of them where the parents don't believe them. And right, that may well sort of stop it in its tracks. However, if the child is verbal and keeps talking about it and provides enough details where their parents can't ignore it, then they may be more likely to contact us. So when we hear from parents, they don't always believe in reincarnation by any means, even after most of them don't believe in it before their child start talking about past life, but then many are very skeptical even afterwards. But they are struck by what their children are saying enough to contact us and try to learn more about the phenomenon.
Thank you.
Yes.
There's a gap between both of these examples that you went through, between when they died, the last person. There's a large gap in between the time that they died and the time of the birth of the next person.
Right.
Do you, how do you explain that? Do you think that because it was so traumatic, it stayed with them for 2 lives because there was like enough gap that they had another life in between?
Yeah, and occasionally kids will describe an in-between life, or they'll describe more than one life, but usually one in much more detail than the other. But yes, we don't know what happens in between. Now, James, actually both of them really, they reported some memories between lives, which about 20% of the children do. They'll talk about experiences between lives. In the cases of James and Ryan, they didn't talk about why they were gone so long, or they did not talk about a life in between, but what they talked about was choosing their parents. So for instance, James said that he was happy that he had chosen his parents and that he did it when they were staying at a pink hotel in Hawaii and they were eating dinner on the beach. Well, it turned out that before James was born, his parents had gone to Hawaii and stayed at a big pink hotel, and their last night they did have dinner on the beach. And it was during that trip where they started trying to conceive. His mom did not get pregnant during that trip. It was a couple of months later, but that was when the intention started. But as far as why there is such a long gap then and then such a shorter gap other times, we don't know. Now, often it has to be a short enough interval where the facts can be verified. So, these days with the internet and with the lives that they picked, there were ones that even though it had been 40 or 50 years, we were able to track down records that verified their memories. Whereas if you describe just being, a nondescript farmer who lived 40 years ago, very unlikely we're going to be able to verify that unless there are specific notes. So I do think it's more likely that they can be verified if they're more recent. But it's a mystery to us. Yeah. Yes.
And you don't look at older children for obvious reasons. It would be much harder to separate everything out and be able to scientifically isolate what you need. But I'm wondering if in the course of your research you actually come across older children or even adolescents or even people who are older who have what would seem to be past life resonance or memories, but you simply can't include them in the scope of the study that you're doing. Does that ever come up at all?
Yes, so, I mean, the main reason that we focus on young children is they are the ones with the memories. But you're right, as you get older and get exposed to more and more facts about the world or history, then you have to wonder, did the child learn about this through some sort of ordinary means? There are older children and occasionally adults who report that they developed memories of a past life. Now, some of them will do it through hypnotic regression, which we are actually rather skeptical of. But some of them will have events where they say that stirred memories in them. And again, they may have been exposed to a lot of things. So if they suddenly have strong images of, say, being shot down in a plane in World War II, well, who knows what they may have seen on television or whatever over the years. They may not remember that they saw it now, but they did see it, and somehow it's in the memory banks. So, yeah, and then occasionally there'll be adults who feel like they have resonance with the past life, and it's usually someone who is famous. So we have a number of Thomas Jeffersons in our files, or Marilyn Monroe, that's a pretty popular one. So those cases, frankly, we don't put any stock in. Yes.
From all the case studies, is it always the same gender that's being reincarnated?
Well, that's a good question. It's the same gender in 90% of the cases. But in the other 10%, they will talk about being a different gender. And we've looked at those cases. And what we have found is that many of them show what we call gender nonconformity. So in the general population, most young children will show sort of typical or really stereotypical behaviors of their gender. So little boys are more likely to play with trucks and little girls with dolls. And, there are a lot of reasons about why that might come about. But most children do that. But 3% of young girls and 5% of young boys show gender nonconformity, where they show behaviors that are more typical of a different gender. Well, in our cases of a child with memories of a past life of a different gender, 80% of them show gender nonconformity. So that does seem to be sort of another behavioral characteristic that has really carried over from the past life. Yes.
Within the cases, were there any more other than James that spoke about actively choosing their parents? Did anyone else talk about that?
Yes. As far as do other children besides James talk about choosing their parents, and yes, they do. And it can vary in the way that they do that, so that when I was in Thailand, I came across cases where it seemed very kind of physical in a way. There was one little girl who said that in her past life she got really sick and ambulance took her to hospital, and then she died. And after she died, then she went running after the ambulance trying to get back home. And she eventually got tired and stopped by the road, and then she saw her future mother walking by and decided to follow her to be born. There are others who will talk about guides leading them to their parents. So it's not exactly their choice, but that a choice has been made. So, it's hard to know what to make of that. But again, most of the children don't report any events between lives, but then there are these 20% who do. Some of them will talk about not just choosing the parents, but before that, of going to other realms like heaven, and the American kids can use the word heaven, and having experiences of seeing other beings, or some of them will talk about talking with God, various things, and then again often being led to their new families to start their next life. Yeah. Yes.
Is there any correlation that you've found between children's persistent nightmares and potentially this kind of memory resonance, even if the children are not like verbal about what happened to them or who they were or any specific details? Does any of that come up in your studies, even if it's not something you can quantify?
Yeah, so looking at nightmares in sort of in general in young children, and I mean, it's hard to say. Obviously, all young children have some nightmares. And I mean, they can be quite severe, but it's not that many who will repeatedly, I mean, like several times a week, have the same nightmare. And of course, a lot of nightmares have a lot of fantasy in them. So they may have nightmares about monsters or whatever, children in the general population. Whether any of that connects with something from a past life, we don't have any way of knowing. Because again, it couldn't be verified unless there are specific details like names where it could be checked.
B.Tucker.
Yes.
So through all your research work, do you see any scientifically approved experimental ways to prove this concept?
Well, I mean, we'd love to have one. I mean, people have wondered about doing genetic testing, but I don't see that we would expect there to be some sort of genetic similarity between the past life and the current one, because something that physical. I mean, I think it's more of a sort of a consciousness thing, not that somehow you have genes that are the same. Now, how the genes get expressed, I mean, that's possible. It's what's called epigenetics, but that would be very hard for us to test. The other thing we've wondered about is doing brain scans. And there's what's called functional imaging of seeing what the brain is doing while the person is doing some activity. The problem is it would be very hard to get very young children. It would be impossible to have them sit still in a fMRI scanner, which make a tremendous amount of noise, while they're remembering their past life. But also, many of these children have to be in the right frame of mind to even access these memories. And it's usually during a relaxed time. So it's often like during a car ride or after a bath or whatever that they come out with these things. So some of them can do it anytime, but a lot of them could not do it on cue. So it would be very hard to test to see, even with the EEG, which a young child could tolerate, but to catch them when they're having those memories and see what's going on in the brain. We don't view this work as proof. What we view it as is evidence. And Ian Stevenson was always very careful to point out that this is not proof. But much of science is about gathering evidence instead of proof. But the first book on these cases that he wrote, he titled 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation. So he's always very modest in his claims, but he would never have said that they were proof.
Are you going to continue just gathering evidence, or do you have an actual goal or some objectives that you are heading toward with your study or research?
Yeah, where does this go? Well, we've been collecting cases for a long, long time, and but I still think there's value in collecting more, especially, frankly, the American cases, because if we had 50 cases as strong as James or Ryan's, I don't see how people could just ignore that. So we do want to continue to do that, but we also, as we were talking earlier, we want to try to learn more about the context where these memories occur. So again, doing studies with the families and seeing are there particular parents that are more likely to have children with memories of a past life. The other thing I would like to do is determine just how common it is in the U.S. We took part in a survey where we were just one small part of it, but a survey of our Charlottesville, where we live, and five surrounding counties. And one of the questions that we had was asked parents, do you have a child who's talked about a past life before? Well, 6% of them said that yes, which was so much higher than I expected that I didn't necessarily believe the results. So what I would like to do is do a survey that's dedicated to this question, a nationwide kind of survey, and find out, when they say yes, do they mean what we mean as far as a child remembering a past life? But if it is that common, then again, there's all the more reason not to ignore it if 6% of children report memories of a past life. So it's those kinds of things that we want to continue to work on. So they're not necessarily one big breakthrough, but continuing to advance the work so that it becomes more, becomes harder for people to dismiss, because it looks like there's definitely something going on.
So you say like harder to dismiss, so do you do like also video? Do you tape the kids on video? And is there online like resource that one can kind of type on Google and like find more information about it?
Well, you can certainly find more information about our work by going to our website, or if you Google my name, Jim Tucker. And on our website, we do have videos, but it's mostly from television programs about or their talks that we've given. There's a Netflix series called Surviving Death, which the episodes covered a variety of work, and some of the episodes, to be honest, were stronger than others. But the last one in the series was about our work. So they showed James's family and Ryan's family and talked with them, but they also followed me on a case which proved to be quite interesting. So that would give you more of a flavor of sort of in the moment. One thing that I did with that child that I'm trying to do more of lately is do picture tests. So with that child, I won't go into the full details of the case, but I would show him pairs of pictures, one of them from people from the past life and the other one being a control picture. And when we've done that, there was one case where I showed them 6 pictures, and the child was 6 for 6 of choosing the right picture. So again, that's another thing that adds to the evidence. But you can see some of that going on in that series on Netflix called Surviving Death. Yes?
Do you think there's any influence in how children are able to use like mobile phones and laptops and iPads and how they remember their past lives? Have you seen it?
So any influence on iPads and computers and so forth and phones with how they remember past lives? Well, interesting question. I mean, the internet is sort of a double-edged sword for us, because we can often find things about the past life in ways that we never could have before, but it also means the families could have as well, which then muddies the waters. I mean, most of these children, again, are very young. I mean, I know some 3- and 4-year-olds may be on the internet. I don't think, they're learning about a past life that way. But I mean, young children, their brains are being wired differently than ours, for better or worse. I mean, with the constant devices that they have. So, hopefully it's for the good. But I don't know that it would necessarily affect past life memories, except, with memories and with most anything, having downtime is where the brain can kind of consolidate this. I mean, certainly sleep that consolidates it too. Young children these days, their minds don't have much downtime because, and adults too for that matter, if people are feeling bored, they pull out their phones. So, there may be a loss that comes with that, as well as the gain of what we use our phones for. But yeah, it certainly could have an effect. So. All right, well, I certainly appreciate everyone's attention. And yes, yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Tucker, for your highly enriching presentation.
Yeah.
As I told you before, this topic kind of melts into our Tibetan tradition. So it was, as you know, we were even more anticipated, like, you know, we were more excited to listen to your talk. And I'm sure there are many monks and nuns who have participated in listening to this talk online. Yeah. And as a token of our gratitude, we have a small gift for you, King Ola. Amen. And we would also like to thank your wife coming here with you. Yeah.
Well, my wife is the one who introduced me to. She's the one who got me interested in all this. I was just having a normal, ordinary life before we got together, and she opened my mind to so much, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama and reincarnation as a concept. So yes, I thank her every day.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.